Hi, everyone, and welcome to this session of the European Regional Roundtable of UNEPFI. I'm Daniel Bothers, the European Regional Coordinator at UNEPFI, and will be the moderator of this session on linking the European ambition to the global goals. And the objective of this session is to really take a look at the connections between what we have seen, especially in the last week and also currently at COP26, with regards to the achievement of the global goals and the role of the European Union and of the European institutions, financial institutions, into pushing that agenda forward. And we see that the pledges that have been made, the commitments and the negotiations are continuing, and we are quite encouraged to see how financial institutions in Europe are taking leadership in order to go ahead and commit to a net zero economy by 2050, and also to commit to the goals that the regulators, and in this case, the European Commission, the European Union, is putting forward towards 2030, 2050 with the decarbonization pathway. And in this regard, we really see that both the connections between the private and the public sector and the European and the global levels are completely interlinked. And that's the aim of this session, is to a bit unearth and explore what are the core elements on how these interrelations are actually happening internally, let's say, with the European institutions, with the Commission, and also with the European Banking Authority, to see how the synergies are moving, what are the core elements, how the taxonomy is shaping the discussion, how disclosures as a core element of the full EU regulatory package are actually bringing the institutions closer to those targets and to those goals, and also hear from the banks how they're looking at it internally and how this is moving forward. So without further ado, I would like to present the speakers for this session. So with us, we have Elodie Feller, that is a policy officer on sustainable finance at DG FISMA, the European Commission. We have also Tony Balabriga, that is the Global Head of Responsible Business at BBVA. It's quite engaged in the UNEPFI work. And Pilar Gutierrez, that is the Acting Head of Reporting and Transparency Unit at the European Banking Authority. So please join me in welcoming our great speakers today. And I would like to start already by asking briefly a question to Elodie to understand, okay, we have seen that in July, the European Commission published the EU strategy on financing a stable economy. And we have seen that among the topics also a global ambition and really to try to push the double materiality and the different aspects of the EU regulatory package are core on this strategy. So could you please drive us a bit through the key content and how would you plan to go ahead with regards to this?
Hi, and hi, Daniel, and everyone, and thank you very much for having me today for this important event. Indeed, so the EU has set for itself very clear and ambitious sustainability goals. And so what the Sustainable Finance Framework of the EU tries to achieve is to engage with the finance industry and provide a soft but also a regulatory framework to support the financial industry to meet those goals for themselves, but also in the real economy. And the Sustainable Finance Framework started in 2018, as you know, with the action plan, and it continues to develop. And so indeed, we have published in July a Sustainable Finance Strategy, which builds on the action plan and tries to further strengthen and reinforce some of those aspects. If I take a little step back and try to explain, you know, what we had and what we're building on, we had initially 3 building blocks. So the first building block being the EU taxonomy. The taxonomy regulation informs on the environmental performance of economic activities, and the taxonomy is focused purely on outcomes. So from the double materiality perspective that you mentioned, it's focused very much on what is good enough from an environmental perspective in the real economy to support investors and banks make informed decisions. We also have, as a second building block, a mandatory disclosure regime, most of which is entering into force in January. The SFDR for financial products already came into force in March of this year, but you have now the Article 8 Delegated Act of the Taxonomy regulation that is also coming into force in January. And so there's a lot of attention right now in the market that is focused on what those disclosures should look like, and indeed how data can flow from the economy to the banks, to the financial institutions, to the insurers in order to inform their decisions and to support their own targets and commitments to the sustainability goals. So first, the taxonomy, second, the disclosure regime, and third building block that was set up in 2018 is a set of investment tools. And so those investment tools are benchmarks, standards, labels, they're voluntary tools, and they aim at making it easier for financial market participants and for banks and others to align their strategy with the EU climate and environmental goals. They're voluntary tools. Now, obviously, since 2018, the climate objectives have changed. We also have in the EU a Fit for 55 package, meaning that we need to reduce our emissions by 55% since the 1990 by 2030. So we have 8 years to achieve that. And so the level of the ambition has increased substantially. We also have the recovery now of the pandemic. If recovery, we're about to enter in the fourth phase we hear in Europe. So we need to also take a social angle and understand how the sustainable finance framework can better trickle down to SMEs, to the real economy, and understand how finance supports that also from that social angle. So the strategy that was published in July, and I will make it short, has builds on the action plan and has 4 pillars. One that focuses on the transition, because we realized that it was not enough to have a taxonomy or a framework that focuses on what is good enough, but also to have a framework that focuses on the pathway to achieving those goals. And so we, in the strategy, very much emphasize on the need to further extend the taxonomy, to enable transition plans, to enable target setting, also to have different types of standards and labels such as sustainability-linked bonds, transition bonds. That's something that the UNEP-FI banks and investors also contributed heavily through the public consultation. Second, we want to have a more inclusive, second pillar of the strategy, a more inclusive sustainable finance framework. We talk about SMEs, we talk about how SMEs can use the tools that were set out for finance institutions, how they can use the taxonomy, how can banks further support green mortgages, green loans, what is the role of regulators, and Pilar and the EBA are working on this with us also very closely. A third pillar that is about integrating double materiality across investment and banking processes. So it's the process pillar. And what it says there is that by the end of when the strategy will be implemented, and we hope no less than 5 years, there should be no more investment, banking, insurance decisions made without having integrated sustainability risks, and that include climate risks. So that is something that is currently being integrated throughout the different legislative proposals and supervisory proposals. The CRD proposal came out this week on climate risks, notably. We want to also work more with supervisors and central bankers to understand what is their role, just not only to stress test the economy, understand where the materiality of those risks are going to come from, but also how they can better plan ahead from again this double materiality perspective of what does it mean for the economy to be so far away from achieving its goals, and what are the risks, and how should that be translated into prudential and or risk management proposals. We also want to look at indeed target setting, transition, fiduciary duties, monitoring of progress. So how can we support member states monitor how their financial sectors are moving towards achieving the goals? We need for that a harmonized, or if not a harmonized, but at least some common ground monitoring framework across the EU to be able to support the member states accordingly. Some member states, some countries have already started to do that. So we will also very much build on the work that has been started. And then obviously the fourth pillar, which is also quite new from, for example, compared to the 2018 action plan, which is the global ambition, where we don't act in autonomy and in our bubble, the EU. Our banks and investors and insurers have activities outside of the EU. They're also outside financiers that are interested in the EU market. And so we need to come up with tools and solutions that for which we have we can coordinate basically with our partner countries. And for that, we have set up, for example, the International Platform on Sustainable Finance, where the EU is represented through the EU Commission, and where the Commission is the secretariat of this platform for now. But it's very much the platform with the 20 plus countries that are committed to developing a taxonomy that is leading this effort of trying to take what the EU has done, understand how that can be implemented elsewhere, and if not, how can we support the development of sustainable finance frameworks elsewhere with those countries. I'll stop here for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elodie. And I think you covered very comprehensive package very succinctly. So I think we have heard about the 3 building blocks, about the taxonomy, the disclosure regime, the investment tools, and the 4 key areas of the strategy on the transition, being inclusive, double materiality, and the ambition. So I would like now to turn to Tony and to Pilar to hear brief reactions on this. Tony, what do you think of the strategy? How a bank as BBVA look into this?
Well, thanks for the invitation. Great to be here. Yeah, so as you may suppose, we welcome obviously the new strategy on sustainable finance, including these 4 pillars, that are all very relevant, and especially the last one that was mentioned by Elodie, about this global ambition, as a 4th pillar, and having the international platform as a key tool, to make real progress. We see as a global bank that it is a must to have the right convergence about the different regulation initiatives in financials, in finance, in the 3 angles. I mean, from one side, from a taxonomy's point of view, where I think the work of the international platform can be critical. Also on disclosure. Well, now we have the newest international standards board. This concept of double materiality is being discussed, obviously. We totally support the approach that we have at the Commission, but also at the end of the day in banking supervision as well. I mean, through the NGFS and the Basel Committee. So on the 3 angles of the financial regulation, on taxonomies, on disclosure, on banking supervision, it is mandatory to have the real convergence. And I think we think that the European Commission and Europe in general can play a critical role in that. And so we welcome the newer strategy. We start to see some movements. As you may know, we are quite active in Latin America. We start to see taxonomies being developed and being proposed in Mexico, in Colombia, trying to, well, let's say, adapt what we have defined here in Europe. So obviously, considering the starting points that they have, but that are good signals of this force that we have to do. But let me give you a brief message about that. We should do more. We can do more. We are, for instance, at BBVA, we are a bank with our 2/3 of our gross income comes from emerging countries. So we see that we cannot succeed without the emerging countries. So we need them, and we need to provide support to them. And so we need ambition in this COP. We need more multilateralism in this COP. The famous Article 9 with this $100 billion per year of financial contribution from developed countries to emerging countries need to be amplified, and we need to have a robust framework to see specific commitments country by country, clarity on those commitments, how they are going to be funded, a specific role to private capital and public institutions, clarity on how funds are going to be allocated between nations. So we think that we need this type of ambition if we want to have the emerging countries coming on board. Otherwise, it will be very difficult.
Thank you, Tony. I think that's a very good message to convey. And indeed, we see that this ambition from the EU is also spreading, and the taxonomies are also spreading. But I would like also to turn now to Pilar, which in any case, from a, let's say, an accomplished point of view of the European Commission in actually rolling out this strategy. What are your views with regards to, let's say, the impact that this ambition and that this project will have, let's say, in the work that is happening at the EBA, but also the impact that the outcomes of your work as well will have in institutions like, in this case, for example, BBVA, that are also thinking globally and thinking about the impacts that this may have on how to actually make sure that this is all connected.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Well, I cannot say as my colleagues that I agree. I agree that it's very welcome, the package published by the Commission on the Renewed Sustainable Finance Strategy. From the perspective of banks, there are actions that aim at increase the resilience of the financial sector to the impact of ESG risks. Yesterday, the Commission announced the publication of the Banking Package 2021 with amendments proposed to the Capital Requirement Regulation and the Capital Requirement Directive that are already integrating some of the proposals included in the Renewed Sustainable Finance Strategy, and we very much welcome those proposals and the amendments to the CRD package. The Commission Action Plan published in 2018 laid the foundations for us, regulators, policymakers, and for banks to start managing risks, to start being transparent on how ESG risk may have an impact on their capital, on their financial position. But we needed more specific tools, and I think that the renewed Sustainable Finance Strategy and the Banking Package published yesterday, which is related in some aspects to this strategy, provides those tools. For banks like BBVA, they will have to integrate in their risk management, the management of ESG risks. We as policymakers and regulators will have to provide the guidance to explain banks, to provide guidance and tools for banks so that they manage, they have tools to manage those risks. It provides also important tools for supervisors, as supervisors will have the tools also to assess as part of the supervisory review and evaluation process how ESG risk might have an impact on banks, on the credit risk of banks, market risk of banks, and other risks. Also, the EBA will be required to do stress testing in order to get forward-looking information on how banks, ESG risks are impacting not banks now, but they may impact in the future. There will be broader disclosure requirements for banks. Already after 2018 and in the CRR2 package, banks were already required to disclose information on ESG risks. We are at the EBA working on technical standards that will implement those disclosures, but the package yesterday is broadening the scope of application of these disclosures to all banks in a proportionate manner. And eventually, I mean, something that is not resolved in the package, but will be because the data is not still available, is whether there is the need for a prudential treatment of assets linked to ESG risks. But the EBA will have to deliver a report on whether there is a need for this prudential treatment of assets. This was already included in the previous regulations, but given the urgency of the topic, this has been brought forward to 2023. So I think that the renewed sustainable finance strategy is very good from the BAR's perspective, from the supervisor's perspective as well. And the publication yesterday also of the banking package implementing some of the, or reflecting some of the measures proposed in the strategy, renewed sustainable strategy, is very good news for us, but also for banks like BBVA, as yes, they will be able to have tools that would allow them to manage these risks and to understand these risks better. And I will stop here. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Pilar. I mean, if I may, to just ask you a brief follow-up question. I mean, I just would like to understand also if you think that as well. I mean, this strategy and this, let's say, global ambition is also allowing the EU to have good role, let's say, for example, in forums like the Network for Greening the Financial System. And it's allowing your participation to be, let's say, in a stronger footing in a way that it allows for showcasing what is happening as a good practice. Pilar.
Yes, as a good practice in terms of disclosures, yes, I think that the Commission Action Plan published in 2018 already included transparency as a key pillar of their action plan, right? One of the main objectives was to foster transparency so that the stakeholders, users of information, were able to understand the value creation of corporates in terms of sustainability, but also how sustainability may impact their risks. Already in 2018, the Commission Action Plan put transparency as a key pillar of their objectives. This action plan triggered several initiatives on disclosure that are relevant for banks, right? We have, Elodie mentioned beforehand, the taxonomy, which is a cornerstone of the Commission Action Plan, and the disclosures that banks, for example, will have to provide, or all type of corporates under the taxonomy regulation, and also banks will have to provide disclosures under Article 8 of the taxonomy regulation. We have also the disclosure regulation, and which also have an impact of banks. Will they have to disclose when they provide investment the products or they provide financial advice? Then we have, of course, the capital requirement regulation, which already published in 2019 included prudential disclosure requirements for banks on disclose how ESG risk, including transitional physical risk, may have an impact on them. So I think that there are several initiatives on disclosures. We as the EBA are working on some of them. We have cooperated with Elodie. We have worked on the disclosures under Article 8 of the taxonomy regulation. We have also the mandate under the capital requirement regulation to implement technical standards on how Pillar 3 disclosures should be provided by banks. There are also the disclosure regulation also includes some requirements for banks, and we are working together with ESMA and EIOPA. We have worked with them on specify these disclosures. But from the perspective of banks, I think that the Pillar 3 part that we are working on, which includes templates, tables, and instructions on what banks will have to disclose, will be a game changer. So far, we have recommendations. We have, in terms of corporate disclosures and in particular banks disclosures, we have the TCFD recommendations at international level. At the European level, the Commission issued guidelines, non-binding guidelines on climate change reporting. But I think that the Pillar 3 work that we are doing, that we published for consultation in March and we are finalizing now, will be a first time where all these recommendations, all these disclosures that banks have to provide will be fixed, will be defined, standardized in the form of templates, on the form of tables, and the form of the associated instructions. So it will be, I hope, and we think that it will be looked at as a very good practice, not only for European banks, but also for international banks. And I'm focusing, of course, in the banking sector, which is our topic. And we hope that this, on the one hand, will help or push banks to collect data that they need, not only for the purpose of disclosures, but for the purpose of the risk management that I mentioned beforehand, and the CRR review emphasized the need for this risk management, but also will set a scene where all their big banks at international level will feel that when they say that they comply with the TCFD recommendations, they do it in a more tangible way through standardized templates, standardized disclosures. So I think that I hope that this will be a very good practice. I mean, the work that the Commission has done at the Article 8 of the taxonomy regulation also is putting in a tangible way information on sustainability also for banks. So I think, and also in the form of templates and instructions. So I hope that this both the Pillar 3 disclosures, the disclosure that banks will have to provide on the green asset ratio and the taxonomy regulation will be like best practices, good practices, both at European level, but also will be seen as good practices at international level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pilar. I understand what you're saying. I mean, it's indeed quite an impressive standard. And what I would like to understand here, if I can turn to Elodie, is like, okay, there's a lot of developments, a lot of depth. I mean, we just heard from Pilar the incredible amount of things that are coming and happening from the disclosure side. But what do you think are the key steps and the next steps to make sure that these European evolutions and these European best practices and approaches are maintained in terms of the pace and to be able to replicate this with the global partners? I mean, as Pilar was saying now, it's important to bring it forward so also the international banks can have this as a basis. But what do you think are the next steps? What is necessary?
Thank you very much, Daniel. I mean, I think there's EU regulation and policymakers. But obviously, and I should have said that right at the beginning of in my introduction, there is no regulatory leadership without financial sector leadership in the first place, right? So we sound very much like bureaucrats, Pilar and I, when we explain all the frameworks and disclosure schemes and all those delegated acts and pieces of regulation. But at the end of the day, this is responding to something that the financial sector was either starting to do already in Europe, and for which the request was to provide more coherence and to protect them against greenwashing, to ensure that data becomes available to investors to inform decisions. So that's part of a much bigger picture, right? It's not just policy and regulation on one hand, and the EU pushing, right? Or at least the Commission pushing. So I think that's a first point, that it is very much ingrained in how the financial sector works. And at the COP, the financial industry altogether came up with very ambitious plans, targets, transition plans on a voluntary basis, right? So this is not something that policymakers or regulators mandated them to do, right? So I think it's very important that we also keep learning from what is being done, and that inspires the policymakers and the regulators also, on their side. So in terms of where we see our role going forward, so obviously there is going to be more to be done, as Antonio was mentioning, and I'm not talking for the climate finance part, but more the sustainable finance regulatory package, right? And what is within our remit and FISMA and within the EBA. There, obviously, we need to think about tools that are much more holistic, much more comprehensive, not in the details, but in terms of how much of the economy they can encompass and how much of this transition pathway they can encompass. So I think this is going to be a huge piece of work for us in the coming years. Another one is the integration of this double materiality aspect. We talk a lot about risks, but we're not going to meet the sustainable goals by looking at risks only. It is a very powerful entry door. It's a very powerful leverage, but we also need to realize that there's a proactive role for the finance industry to play. And indeed, the very commendable pledges made by financial institutions show this, right? That finance institutions see their role, proactive role, in trying to resolve a challenge. Of course, that can help mitigate risks in their balance sheet, but not only, right? So we need to learn from that. And I think the integration of this double materiality aspect as part of processes, prudential regulation as prudential risk management regulation, as Pilar was suggesting, but also at supervisory level is important. And the third point, so first, more holistic approach with our tools. Second, to be The second, the double materiality aspect, so not just in disclosures, but across processes. And the third part is international. So thank you, Daniel, for trying to get us there from a few questions ahead before. We have basically our main tool that is the IPSF, right? That's the International Platform for Sustainable Finance. It's the main vehicle right now for the European Commission as a member of this platform to help drive, not just drive the ambition, but also come up with common understandings with its partners. So there's going to be, before the end of this year, the publication of a common ground taxonomy. So that's not the taxonomy, right? It's not the international taxonomy. It is the comparison of two taxonomies, the EU and the China taxonomies, and where basically we just took the commonalities, right, and the substantial contribution criteria for mitigation in this respect, and try to extract where we can find overlaps. And those overlaps, we hope, can be used by other jurisdictions, but also by finance institutions as a baseline set of criteria for them to build their own definitions. So that's the first thing. And also the IPSF, so the EU, through the IPSF, the EU obviously has its own role in the G20, the G20, the EU has its own role, but also it is through the IPSF a knowledge partner, and it has produced, we have produced an input paper where we have emphasized on the importance of the development of taxonomies, of comparability standards for taxonomies, but also for disclosure requirements. Tony mentioned the FSB, and we are very much working towards bringing together taxonomies and double materiality across the different pieces of that are being negotiated on the G20. So this is our part. And Tony also, sorry, in the last point mentioned emerging markets, and of course this is not just from a climate finance perspective, but also from a sustainable finance perspective. This is something that our strategy looks into. We have a directorate in the Commission called DG INFPA, and they look at international partnerships, and they are going to set up a high-level expert group that is going to look at how the EU, how the Commission can best support emerging markets in the development of their own frameworks, and through different angles, basically. And so that's something we're going to follow through on in the coming 2 years. Stop here. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you very much, Lodine. I think this brings quite well together all of these different areas that we're hearing in terms of, okay, what is the approach that needs to be taken? What is the role of this ambition in actually making these things concrete? And taking this into account, I mean, we see a lot of the things that are happening from the regulatory front, but also you were hinting about the importance and the inspiration that is drawn from the leadership of the financial institutions. I would like to turn to Tony now to understand a bit better, what are the core elements that European banks have done to actually push forward this leadership, both be it by supporting or pushing forward these regulations or by themselves as well. What is the experience that you have at BBVA in doing this?
Well, thanks, Daniel, and thanks, Elodie, for your words. And that's true. I think the private sector has led this movement for the last years, and we obviously welcome all the regulation that we need. That is absolutely critical to scale up. But yes, I think, and focusing on banks and European banks, I'm totally convinced that the best players in the world in sustainable finance are here in Europe. As great players, we have to learn a lot, but we are there working hard. And I think there are 3 elements that are very relevant. No, first, in terms of market solutions, in terms of financial solutions, and so I think European banks has led the new developments or new solutions, and working with quite well with the market-driven standards that we have. And so I think on providing financial solutions and advisory service to our clients, I think that European banks are leading in the world, honestly. The second area to assess our performance about how we manage risk, we still have a lot to do, but I think that we are slightly better than in other regions. So sector policies in general are more evolved in Europe. Also integration in risk management, and thanks now obviously to ECB and EBA work and the European Commission work, Obviously, this is pushing a lot, and I think we are moving fast on that. As I say, we still have a lot to do, but we are there and with clear roadmaps. So I think this will be an advantage, And then finally, a third area, when I say that European banks are leading this movement globally, is that European banks are also leading what is required. It's a systemic change in finance, So the collective action that we have having as industry, well promoted by UNEP-FI, like the principles for responsible banking, where practically 50% of the 240 signatures are European banks, or like the Net Zero Banking Alliance, that today we have close to 90 banks, well, including 40% of the assets in the world in the banking system, and also more than 50% of these European banks. So I think in terms of market solutions, in terms of risk management, in terms of promoting systemic change, I think European banks are leading. In our experience is an example, but we have great examples in Europe that can be highlighted. I mean, we have a long track record on sustainability. Today is a strategic priority for us to have our clients to a more sustainable future. We have an holistic approach to sustainability, not only focusing on climate action, but also on inclusive growth. I will summarize some key experiences and key commitments that are in line with other commitments from our colleagues. One is mobilize sustainable finance. We have amplified our pledge from 2018 to 2025 from 100 billion euros to 200 billion euros, providing full portfolio solutions not only for big corporates but also for SMEs and households. We have a second commitment in line with the Net Zero Banking Alliance to decarbonize our portfolio by 2050. In fact, we have announced a few months ago our phase out on coal, but this week we have announced specific targets by 2030 for other intensive sectors like power, auto, cement, or steel. Also, another commitment, obviously, is to embed climate change and sustainability into our processes in line of what required by the regulator and supervisors, but also beyond that. Also, a key commitment on disclosure and transparency, and also a commitment to engage with all our stakeholders, for this systemic change, So I think that at least in our case, we see sustainability not as a great plan anymore. We see sustainability as a core component of our strategy and value proposition. So I think, yes, European banks are leading. We have a lot to do, but well, we are on track.
Thank you very much, Tony. And I would like to also ask you now as a follow-up question as well, like what are the challenges that you're facing in order to actually achieve this, and the way forward on how you see that happening?
No, I will have to share some challenges that we have in front of us when we want to go global with sustainability. And the first one is that we have to think global. I think we have to deploy the same strategy, but take into account the specificities of the different economies, in this case, emerging countries, which is one of the focus of the session today. So obviously they have a different starting point in terms of infrastructures, energy landscape, vulnerable populations, well-being in general, and also they have a greater dependency on the natural capital, and the high effects of physical risk. So taking into account of this, we have to go global. We cannot, as I said before, to have a strategy. As our CEO says, this is a global issue more than ever. So this is absolutely critical. The second one is a second challenge is what Elodie mentioned before. This idea of help the whole economy to transition. And this also applies to emerging countries. It's not easy. This new financing approach, the transition of the new strategy at the EU level, we think it's very important to ensure that we don't have only financing the green assets or the green projects, but also a more comprehensive approach to transition. The third challenging is that we need more investment in emerging countries when we go global, and especially in developing countries. The International Energy Agency quantifies $1 trillion a year of investment. So if we want to really go global, we need more blended solutions to mobilize sustainable finance at a larger scale, combining more public-private partnerships for resharing and more public funding. So this is another challenge, how to work more together, to mobilize the markets. A fourth challenge is we need a robust voluntary carbon market. We know that obviously we have a carbon market that doesn't work properly. We are members of the task force on scaling voluntary carbon markets. We think that is a complementary tool to accelerate the transition and also to channel investment towards developing countries. So we need to obviously to improve notably this how they work, and carbon markets needs to be focused on fostering liquidity, transparency, standardization, and robustness. So, but this is, we think, is another key piece if we want to go global on sustainable finance, especially on climate. No, and finally, a final challenge for us is obviously that we need more ambition from national governments, no, especially in the developed and emerging countries, no, and also from developed countries. I have to be honest. For the moment, what we see is a lot more regulation and cost to become sustainable. Data requirements, taxonomies, standards, disclosure, banking supervision is really overwhelming, and market price, well, differences between green and non-green are still low. So I would say that where is the carrot, no? So in our opinion, we think that we have to work more on a holistic approach and balanced approach to incentives, not only for the financial industry, but also in all sectors, no, to have this holistic approach to incentives. We think that is a key challenges that we should move on. Otherwise, we are not going to have the change at the scale that we need.
Thank you, Tony. I mean, I think this is very comprehensive, covering all of the aspects of how are we looking into this. And I mean, let's say now we're exploring this connection between the European and the global areas. And of course, I mean, here we're thinking about what is the global, the European ambition for the global goals. But I also wanted to maybe turn a bit around and just also ask you, what are your thoughts in terms of what can we do from INEPFI in order to amplify this opportunity that we have, that there's such a leadership coming from Europe to push it forward, no? I would like to understand what is that we can do. Are we being, let's say, here in this session, with our natural partners to some extent, with the financial institutions, the regulators? What else is needed? And I would like to ask the three of you to give me a bit of an answer briefly, because I think we're already coming to the end of our time. So Elodie, please.
Thank you for this question. It's usually the other way around, that the Commission is being given recommendations. I think, I mean, out top of my mind, I think of those commitments. So the Banking Net Zero Alliance, the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance, or the Insurance Alliances that are hosted at INEPFI. It would be interesting to understand how they integrate EU tools in their methodological thinking. And that would be a first good way of bringing EU tools, to international partners. That would be a first thing, and also to understand what are the challenges of applying those tools onto those commitments and to help transition portfolios. So first point. Second, I think in the strategy, I mean, of course, climate mitigation is on top of everybody's mind right now, but beyond climate, we also are starting to look at biodiversity. Biodiversity risks, but also biodiversity impacts. And we are in a very initial phase here. And so the work that INEPFI is doing on this is going to be crucial to support also the work of experts that are creating the taxonomy and the other four environmental objectives. And third and last, you're a global organization. And so with such EU leaders, you're definitely our best ambassadors. And I think just by nature, having the EU institution leaders at INEPFI, I think makes already a huge difference. And I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Elodie. I mean, I think that's very fair comments in a way to say, like, okay, we're looking now into how to structure, let's say, the way forward for European institutions and how to see this possible integration. And indeed, we understand that the tools that are coming from the EU are quite interesting to see how this can be done. And Pilar, maybe to come to you, how do you see this possibility evolving?
I will focus on the perspective of transparency and disclosure, and because it's my topic, and where UNEPFI could help. So I mentioned before that we hope that all the work on disclosure that we are doing at European level will set a benchmark to be followed by banks outside the EU. We are very happy of the IFRS Foundation announcing the constitution of the international and the ISSBB, the board for setting sustainability standards at international level. And we will very much welcome when these baseline standards start coming up. We also know that the Basel Committee has a task force on climate-related risks, and that they may explore, they support also the ISSB and may explore also Pillar 3 baseline for international active banks. But given that here at the EU, we already have standards. We have the green asset ratio that under Article 8 of the taxonomy regulation, we will soon have Pillar 3 standards. Maybe UNEP-FI would be able to promote across your members, across your partners, the need from transparency and yes, particularly for those international other non-EU financial partners, the need for standardized disclosures that so that all stakeholders are able to understand not only to know that the banks are in net zero alliances or net zero commitments, but to understand how they are doing that. So maybe, yes, from your position, you can promote these good practices across your members in terms of transparency, standardized disclosures and comparability.
Thank you, Pilar. I think we will for sure take that into account. And now I turn to Tony, which, of course, I mean, we're now in the process of also looking into our European strategy at UNEP-FI. So what do you think can be done? I mean, we understand we are, like, the majority of our members are European institutions. There's a large presence, but also a large push and an interest on continuing this ambition. We've seen it throughout all of the net zero alliances, etc. So what do you think, Tony, could be, let's say, the next step also for Europe?
I think that we have to work on both levels, at the institutional level and also at a more systemic level. So at the systemic level, UNEP-FI is really a key pillar, no, to promote this systemic change that we need. So all related to be part of the new architecture that we are building all together. It's absolutely critical, thanks to the huge expertise that we have in this network, no, of professionals, of experts on sustainability that are UNEP-FI, no, together with the 450 institutions and the teams that are being engaged. So I think this is very, very relevant. Also, it's very relevant in this at the systemic level. The extension of the frameworks that we already have, the principles for sustainable insurance, the principles for responsible banking, which are the journeys that can help all institutions to make this journey, no, and also as was mentioned by Elodie, these collective initiatives like the Net Banking Alliance or the Asset Owner Alliance or the Net Insurance Alliance. So all these initiatives, I think that are critical, no, to scale up and to ensure a global consistency of what we are doing. But on the other side, I think also UNEP-FI has a possibility to put also on the table the expertise on all related to impact. No, when we are talking how to assess impact, I think this network of experts, we have a huge potential, no, to put on the table which has been done through methodologies, not only on climate but also in biodiversity, natural capital, on inclusion. So all this, I think, is a key asset for UNEP-FI, and that should be leveraged. And then trying to learn from Europe and how we can translate these learnings to the other regions. I think that it's a very important that building capabilities at the members of the UNEP-FI is critical, and this is a huge challenge also. So I think that all the experience that we have in European banks, for instance, and how to exchange this experience to other banks in other regions where the regulation maybe is not so advanced, or maybe the practices in the market are not so advanced, that it can be very, very important in order to, let's say, to promote a global movement, no, beyond Europe, no. So I think that's a key role to play for UNEP-FI.
Thank you very much, Tony. Thank you, Elodie. Thank you, Pilar. I mean, I think we reached the end of our session. It was very interesting discussions. We have covered many topics from the core elements of the European strategy, what the EU is going to bring forward, what has been, let's say, already brought from the 2018 action plan now to the future and beyond, hopefully until 2030, 2050. Also the core work that the European Banking Authority is doing, which in some cases, you can see the strategy, but let's say also what is happening with the disclosures, with the transparency push, is critical, is driving actually the behaviors, but at the same time, as we also have seen from Tony, banks are committed, financial institutions are committed to the global goals, and that they are based in Europe. It's just a catalyst to actually push forward that ambition on both sides. And we go back to the beginning. This reflection between European and global dynamics and private-public dynamics is key. And at UNEP-FI, as I say, reflecting also on all of your answers, we are committed to keep doing this in the way forward and beyond. So hopefully we'll see, let's say, the light at the end of the tunnel, and we'll manage to reach net zero by 2050, thanks to all of your help. And of course, we'll put our best to do so. So thank you very much. Thank you everyone for your attention, and hopefully you'll enjoy the rest of the discussion. So thank you very much, and goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.